It's a critical input to decision-making, how we communicate and shape other evidence that influences decision is equally important. So, Patrick, I'm so intrigued by the work of you and your team in Cameroon to advance understanding of research to storytelling. Can I invite you to share more this particular methodology and perhaps some examples on why it is being so powerful in your context?
Yes, thank you very much. Once upon a time, there was a river. It was a river of forest plots, violin plots, heterogeneity, chi-squared, regression, multivariate regression. It was a river that was flowing through Cochrane, Campbell, JBI, the Africa Evidence Network, WHO, Gavi. This river had hoped that the human family that lives in the village downstream will be able to reach out to its belly and drink of its waters. Unfortunately, when the villagers reached out, they were unable to reach the belly of the river. So, the villagers remained thirsty. Then came the river of stories. The river of stories modified the chi-squares, the violin plots, the forest plots, into emotions, into art, into dance, into songs. And this swelled up the belly of the river. And now downstream, the human family in the village were able to reach out and drink of the waters. That is the comings of the two rivers. Today, I'll be sharing with you the very systematic approach that we have used to tell stories about science and to get data into the lives of characters, to communicate evidence, but also to use that to gather experiences that people who have been exposed to certain interventions have been able to share with us, and by which we have been able to use to generate evidence that we can use to inform decision-making, both to policymakers, to practitioners, and to the general population. I would start by some quotes by which we have been guided over time. So the first quote is coming from Ben Okri. Ben Okri is a Nigerian writer, a prolific writer, and he's a storyteller as well. And he had once said, "The mind cannot conceive what the eyes have not seen." This sounds very interesting, but if you think of it the second time, you will ask the question, how do people innovate if you must see something for your mind to conceive it? And this clarifies us as to why storytellers in Africa are considered oracles. Because sometimes the human eyes cannot see the abstract. However, through storytelling, we can get these abstract things into versions that human minds can conceive. And this is an example that we know from George Orwell's 1984, where he spoke about things that we are seeing now, like the mobile phones that were not existent at the time when he was writing the story. So it is the belief, and we actually have a storyteller at eBay who talks about how storytellers can do abstract navigation. So they can navigate to areas where they can see things that we have not seen and bring this back to us. And that's a very strong strategy that storytelling uses, especially in times when there is a lot of mistrust around research evidence. Another very interesting quote is from one of the participants at one of our storytelling events, who is with us here today, Sandy Oliver. And she said, "When we tell a story, we are inviting someone into our world. When we listen to a story, We are taking a step into their world. Storytelling is not just for lay communities. It is for enhancing understanding of the context of evidence. And I think this is very strong. There is a lot of mistrust between researchers, research participants, policymakers, practitioners, and the general population. And storytelling is one way that could get the population into our space and can also get us into the space of the population. And this can build the trust that we need to communicate evidence. Another quote that comes from the work we've been doing at eBase, and it's from our experience, is that as the human family, we are more similar than we are different, but our few differences could completely spin us on our heads. And this is exactly why storytelling is universal, because there is such human similarity in storytelling across all civilizations that it's an opportunity that we must exploit. Otherwise, we would be losing on a very important component of evidence communication and evidence dissemination, and as well evidence translation. Now, imagine storytelling of the Sustainable Development Goals. Imagine us telling all the wonderful stories of the child who is now able to walk to school because the child took a polio vaccine. Or how humanity stood up against COVID-19. And maybe some of these stories about how Rwanda has protected women's rights could actually make the United States think more seriously about sexual and reproductive rights for women. Or push the government of Cameroon to act faster on universal health coverage. But for us to be able to tell stories, we must be systematic, we must be strategic, and we must be collaborative. And our story at eBase is all around collaboration, the coming of the two rivers. Thinking beyond what works, we need to combine this with what matters for the people. What is the most interesting thing that the policymakers, the practitioners, the populations, they want to hear? And we combine science and arts in that respect. Now, this approach is very challenging, and I think the next speaker will be talking about a litany of failures. And this is what we went through ourselves, but we kept on rising, learning, adapting, and coming again. As researchers, we spend a lot of time talking to ourselves, and in that light, we do not have enough time to listen to the people that we have to talk to. So what we need to do in this coming of the two rivers is find a way to integrate all the existing evidence communities, Cochrane, Campbell, JBI, Education Endowment Foundation, to tell stories about the evidence. Thank you.